Earlier in our journey, we introduced you to the live, die, give triangle, the 3 daily decisions of a disciple. But by now, you've likely realized that this is harder than it looks. To live this way every single day and moment by moment throughout each day, it's harder than it looks. Why? Because so often we don't have our mind on Jesus, but instead on ourselves, on our tasks, on our families, all the things we must rush and do. And the default setting of our soul is not righteousness, but selfishness. And as a result, we're not servants. We're driven more by our agenda and desires than others. So how do we live this way? Truly live for Christ and die to self and give our lives in service to others. I believe one of the reasons that we struggle and fail is because we continue to live with self at the center, operating out of our own power and strength, trying in ourselves to live for Him and die to self and give our lives away. But what the scriptures tell us is that to truly live this way, and to truly operate within these 3 decisions, we cannot operate by our own power and strength, but instead we must operate by the power and the leading of the Holy Spirit. So consider this. In Romans 5:8, Paul says that only those who have their minds set on Christ can truly live for Him. That it's only when our minds are set on Him that the living for Christ can happen. And that only happens when we have our mind set on the Spirit, under the power of the Spirit, His leading day by day. Just a few verses later in Romans chapter 5 again, but now verse 13, Paul says if we live for the flesh, we will die by the flesh. But if we live by the Spirit, we can put to death the deeds of the body. The only way then to die to self, to die to the old habits, is to live every day in the power of the Holy Spirit and to have our mind set on Him. And then how then do we give our lives away every day and be the servant that Jesus taught us to be? Paul in Philippians chapter 2 says that to have the humility of Christ and the service of Jesus Christ, we must not just have encouragement with Christ, he says, but also if there's any participation in the Spirit, then and only then can we be the humble servant, thinking not of our needs, but putting the needs of others, treating them as more significant or more important than ourselves, he says in Philippians 2. You see, it's only when we live according to the power and the leading of the Holy Spirit that we're able to truly live for Christ, die to self, and give our lives in service to others. And to have the mind and posture to live and be the example of Jesus can only happen when we're operating out of the power that Jesus gave us, the power of the Holy Spirit. You may be asking, okay, well, that sounds great. I get it in theory and in theology, but practically speaking, what does it look like to live moment by moment, day by day, under the power of the Holy Spirit instead of my own power, my own strength? 2 simple words. First is that we have to submit. We must submit. Every single day, submit ourselves to God all over again and submit ourselves day by day and moment by moment to the leading and the power of the Holy Spirit. A return to a quote that we began with earlier in this journey, a quote by C.S. Lewis: relying on God has to begin all over again every day, as if nothing had yet been done. Every day we must submit ourselves to God. We must invite Him into the next meeting. We must submit our mind to Him when we're in traffic or we're talking to someone that's difficult. We must ask for His help and His leading instead of giving our own advice when we are asked for it. Moment by moment, we must submit to the power and leading of the Spirit. And then secondly, with that, not just submit, but also obey. We must not just submit, but when He leads us and guides us, we must choose to obey. And the more that we obey in the little, the more we'll be entrusted with the greater. Jesus said this: whoever is faithful with little will be given much. I believe the same is true of operating in the power and under the leading of the Holy Spirit. the more faithful we are with obeying the little promptings and nudges, the more we learn to hear his voice, the more our heart is tuned to him, and the more we are entrusted with his leading so that we can obey in greater and greater things. We must submit and obey. This is how we posture ourselves for the leading of the Holy Spirit. And it's only by his leading and by his power and help that we are able to live for Christ, die to self, and give our lives in service to others in the way that Jesus modeled and in the way that he commands us to walk every single day.